We have spent several weeks now talking about the gates in the Bible. We discussed various things that happened at the gates. We expanded the concept of gates to go beyond something that keeps things in or out. It does include that, but it also represents the place where the decisions about what comes in and out occurs. The local leaders from the 7 mountains exert their influence at the activities at the gates. I think we have enough background on the gates for now to cover my intent with this discussion. So I think we've got enough concept and enough background, enough understanding to move on. You're starting to see the gates when you read the Bible. I've heard many of you talk about it. You read something and it's like, oh, well, that struck me now that's a gate. That's an avenue. That's a influence that's being recognized or exploited, or I'm starting to see these things. Whether or not it says gates, I'm starting to see the concept of gates. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I've heard each of you to a certain degree express that idea that you're starting to recognize this concept of gates. You're also starting to pick up on when those gates are referenced in everyday life, when those gates are when you're under the influence of a gate in your everyday life. You're starting to recognize where that occurred. You're starting to see where that happened, and I'm grateful for all of that. I'm happy to report that now it's the time to move to the next concept in our discussion of contending for the gates. We now know what the gates are. The next thing we need to understand is who is supposed to do the contending at the gates. Yeah. Absolutely.
The reason I'm saying is because you have some dreams about it.
Right.
That's not lost on me. That's a big deal.
Okay.
Because it has helped me, my preconceived notions of what a gate is, my current context is very different than what it is in the Bible we've studied. So that's been a big eye. So can you
let me read our theme. Let me read my theme verse, and then as we get to the bottom of the verse, we'll expand on it just a little bit more than I anticipated. And then, as you have questions or whatever, I will help you go back through what we've already talked about and get caught up. I also paid attention because she's dreamed about the gates. So you need to be good about what that is, and I'm not trying to diminish that at all. As a group, we're ready to go to the next thing, and I will help you get caught up on whatever's there. But thank you, Adam, for bringing that up. So we're going to review gates just briefly in just a second, and then we're going to start about who is doing the contending. Now that we've figured out what we're contending for or where we're contending at, now we're going to start talking about who is doing it, who's supposed to be there. Today, let's talk about the organization Jesus announced. The organization Jesus announced. Our theme verse, Matthew 16, 13 through 20. Jesus then went to Caesarea Philippi. Jesus speaking to his disciples. Who do people say the Son of Man is? The disciples. Some say John the Baptist, and some say Elijah, and some say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. Jesus, and you? Who do you say that I am? Peter says, you're the anointed one. You're the Son of the living God. Jesus, Simon, son of Jonah, your knowledge is a mark of blessing. For you didn't learn this truth from your friend or from teachers or from sages you've met on the way. You learned it from my Father in heaven. Verse 18 is the key verse here. This is why I've called you Peter, rock, for on this rock I will build my church. Build my church. The church will reign triumphant even at the gates of hell. The church will reign triumphant even at the gates of hell. Peter, I give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Jesus ordered his disciples to keep these teachings secret. Jesus, you must tell no one that I am the anointed one. For our purposes, verse 18 is the main one, and verse 18 is where I'll do a little bit of review. Verse 18 again. This is why I've called you Peter, rock. For on this rock I will build my church. Okay, what rock's he talking about? The truth that Jesus was the Messiah and the revelation and the ability to hear and perceive that truth through supernatural means, through spiritual means. It wasn't something that he learned naturally. It was a download that he got from heaven. So
he had received that.
Yes, that he could hear. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and that's a big part of it. But the rock is not Peter. It's not anything to do with Peter. It's the revelation of who Jesus was as the Messiah and all that that means, all that that means he would do and fulfill, and also the ability to get the download from heaven, the Holy Spirit leading and guiding and learning, teaching him something new that he'd never considered prior to that moment. Yeah, but all of it's still got to go back to who Jesus was and the ability to get a new concept during the download. All right. So let's review these gates for just a little bit. The church will reign triumphant even at the gates of hell. Now, we visited Caesarea Philippi and we looked at the actual site where they were. We looked at some videos and some things of people on the site and all the things that were being done at that site. Do you remember some of the things that were happening there? Ritual sacrifices, okay. To who? Baal and Pan and Caesar. There was a temple to Caesar. So what all is occurring here? And we introduced this idea of the 7 mountains. Now watch me not be able to list them. Religion, business, education, government, family, arts, media, entertainment, science and technology. That's 7. Yay. Good job to me. Those are the places where either representatives of the kingdom of heaven or the kingdom of darkness, they don't really gather, but where their influence gathers, and they make decisions from those mountains that affect the culture. That's what was going on with these gates. These gates were access to the realms of culture that hell currently controls. And I'm going to make this point, and then we'll continue that review in just a second. This verse says the gates of hell. Some versions say the gates of death, others say the gates of Hades. What extra information can we gather from this? Who or what is currently possessing those gates? The gates of hell. Who is currently possessing those gates? If you look at our society, if you look at our culture, who is influencing the culture? Through entertainment, through business, through religion, through government, through science and technology, through the family. All these people are trying to drive their agenda into the decision maker governing the culture. And I'm saying that all that happens at this concept called the gates.
Although the ownership of the gate is in this case, right, Satan.
Currently.
Currently.
Right.
The gate represents much more where that influence is occurring, right? It's like where business transactions used to occur. Like the meeting was at the gate, not necessarily about passing through the gate necessarily, rather than it being actually like commerce would happen at the
Right.
gate. Official meeting.
Right.
Like contract would be exchanged. All those things would occur there.
And for Cheryl's reference, that's what we've been talking about for the last few weeks. Is we went through the Old Testament and all the verses that talk about all the stuff that happened at the gates. That's what he's referring to. Business deals, judgments, court cases, marriages, property transactions, capital crime executions, all sorts of stuff happened at the city gates. It was the meeting place. So when I say the gates of hell, what am I talking about? The realm in which hell is exerting influence on the culture. Now, it makes sense that those gates are currently controlled largely by hell. Otherwise, there'd be no need for us as believers to go and contend for them. Now, when we first started talking about this, we mentioned the idea that gates don't move. Somehow we got this idea, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. That means we're going to bury ourselves and bunker ourselves in our churches, and the hell can't get into our churches from the outside and cause us to be defeated. Well, it does mean that, but gates don't move. So if the gates of hell won't prevail, who's on offense and who's on defense? We, the church, are supposed to be on the offensive against the gates that don't move. And if we do this right, if we attack this correctly, if we present the truth, if we come like Peter came and he understood who Jesus was and all that he fulfilled and get our divine assignments from the Holy Spirit, then we will have instructions about, okay, you need to go over to that section of the gate and exert influence there. You need to get this law changed. You need to get this business thing fixed. You're doing your part. You're doing your part. You're doing, and the totality of it is eventually we're going to start seeing that control, that influence of the culture shift from being governed by hell to being governed by the kingdom of God. Yes. Rest. Yes. Darkness can invade. I mean, how is darkness defined anyway? There's no definition for darkness. It is the absence of light. Right. It doesn't take much light to get the thing to change. So the church as a whole has missed this whole concept of what Jesus is trying to say. I'm commissioning you as an army, if you will, and your objective is going to be to go to those places of influence in the culture and change it. So that hell is no longer influencing, we call them gates, but these mountains, these decisions that are being made that impact the culture, hell is no longer only responsible for their creation. Now you've got a godly voice that's also in the mix trying to change the tide there. Go ahead. Yes. Yes. Yes.
We see some of the obvious, when we see people that are sick, and people that are down and out and keeping elephants, we see that. We don't always see the big things that are an influence because we get so focused this way. But Jesus came to destroy all of it.
Yes.
But you don't just look at the gates, you look at the people at the gates and answer to somebody else that's pulling on.
Right. I'm not saying that we're actually going to physically go to a gate. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the concept of the gates is who is controlling what parts of society? Where are the decisions being made? Who is influencing those decisions that determine what a society does or doesn't do? By and large, the church isn't there. I mean, we have the religion mountain, which we should be at top of. Are we in top of the religion mountain? It really depends upon where you are when you ask the question. What are we seeing at play in our country right now? Islam, Sharia law, it's another, and I'm not even going to say it's a religious base, but it falls under the guise of a religious based thing, trying to get roots. Yes. Hidden under a religious, yeah, absolutely. But that just goes to show you that we don't even have control of the religious mountain. The one that we should have been very strong in and very determined on, we don't even have good control of it. We've even lost it. Not to mention the fact that we didn't even want to play in all these other arenas.
Because we wanted to be nice.
Yes. Yes, that's good. Yeah.
You know, so much of what is happening in our world today, you know, people will shy away, church people will shy away from the political realm. But what is taking place in politics today, there are moral issues that the church should be addressing. And we're not because we don't want to engage in that. Well, if you leave that vacuum, then who else is going to be filling the vacuum and telling the world how they need to exist?
Now, let's talk just briefly about that. Where does our government spend a good portion of its money right now? The poor, the prisoners, the orphans. Touche.
Because that shows people are trying to get out there and get more people to vote for them.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
That's what that is.
But the poor, for example, widows and orphans and that sort of stuff. Who is supposed to be taking care of them? That was a biblical mandate for the church to do. And we have said, oh, we don't want to mess with that. We don't have the resources to mess with that. Here, you do it. And as soon as we took our hands off of it and said, you do it, now we're giving it to the government, who is not known for their efficiency in any aspect, not to mention the fact they don't have any real life to impart to that situation. All they can throw at is money.
The church was responsible for widows.
Yes, yes, yes.
And now the church leaves it up to the government to decide how they're taking care of it.
How much money would it free up in our budget in the government if they didn't have to mess with all that?
Biblical understanding and teaching of what biblical prosperity looks like. Because if the church as a whole understood prosperity God's way.
Yes.
There would be enough coming into your.
Yes.
pocket to supply the need. Starting with the church first, if you have widows and orphans within the church, you're supposed to be taking care of those and then meeting the needs outside of the church.
And I've heard religious leaders, when that topic is brought up, "Oh, well, there's not enough money in the churches to do all this." That means we've messed something else up. Do you think that God would tell us to do that and not give us a way to find the resources to pay for it? I didn't really think that through, did I? God's never going to say something like that. He is our provider according to his riches and glory by Christ Jesus, not according to our own. So what does that mean? The very fact that they're saying we as a church don't have enough money to pay for all the poor and the widows and the needy and all that stuff that we're supposed to be doing, that means we've ignored the business side of this mountain. We've ignored the prosperity side of this mountain. So instead of getting that fixed, well, fool with that. We don't want to mess with that. We don't want to be called greedy or prosperous, or we don't want to be tied to that particular doctrine, or we don't want any of that stuff. So we're just going to let the government handle all of it. But we threw away our seat at the table. We threw away our influence at the gate. No wonder somebody else picked up that vacuum and is now making decisions that are not godly. Does that help understand the concept of the gate? I will gladly walk you through some of the stuff that we're building up to. Thank you for asking that and making sure that I did it. Okay, so we're okay with the gates, and right now I'm saying that right now this says they're controlled by hell. The only reason that we're even having this whole group discussion is right now those gates are controlled by hell, by and large. What are we going to do about that? Is that what Jesus wanted? Is that what he came to die for? Is that what he instituted? Yeah, you guys are getting your tail whooped, so just pack it in and hold the fort down, and eventually I'll come back and save you at one point, and then we'll all be good. That is the mentality of many churches, sadly, but that is far from what Jesus actually intended when he set this whole thing up, when he started this whole process. Okay, from this passage, who is supposed to be at the gates of hell reigning triumphant? The church. So whatever this church thing is, they're the group that's supposed to be at the gates, either battling against the gates that hell currently controls or getting to the place where they eventually control those gates. So Jesus is setting up his legacy, the thing that's going to continue his ministry, the thing that's going to propagate his life's work. He's setting up this institution, and I don't even want to call it an institution because that has such negative connotation with it. This organization, this entity, this thing, he's setting it up. This thing is going to be the thing that is going to do this. This thing is going to be the group, the entity, the organization that is the one that's going to do the contending at the gates.
Gates of hell is the originating point of the river.
Yes.
Evil comes in gates of hell, but as the river flows over it, you think about baptism, all the people were baptized in the river. The baptism is overcame the evil of the origin of the river. As flow. And that's I think sometimes we concentrate too much on the evil where it originates and not enough on where we are at the river.
That's true. That's good.
That's that happened. Where in our faith, and we living a new life. It is a cutting off point.
You are buried with Christ in baptism and raised with him, and yeah. Yes. Yep. Okay, does your experience with church match this definition of a group that is reigning triumphant at the gates of hell? I dare say that there's not a one of us in here that have an experience. Now, I'm not talking about a single activity. I'm not talking about a single event. I'm talking about your overall perception, your overall concept of church. Does that produce something that is reigning triumphant at the gates? Now, my question is, why not? Did Jesus say it was possible? Was that Jesus's instruction, his mandate to this entity that he's creating, is for you to be the group that is reigning triumphant? And another thing that's built into that is we have succumbed to the concept of church that has been added to the word throughout the years. So what I'm proposing is we stop saying the word church because it denotes certain things that may or may not be true. Let's go back to actually what this word was in the original language and try to redefine it. Now, I'm not saying we're throwing the church out. I love the church. God died for the church. He's still going to use the church, but he's going to use it in the concept in which he originally initiated it, not in whatever it has become since that time. So mentally, we need to make a distinction between our idea of church, however we got that idea, and what Jesus was actually talking about. So I'm saying that to do that, one of the things that can prompt us is stop saying church and start saying the word that he used, which was ecclesia. So ecclesia is the thing that we're going to be talking about. What did Jesus mean with this ecclesia thing? Now, I'm going to approach this the same way I approach the gates. When we start talking about the gates, I told you, okay, this is what I believe about the gates, and then I set out and we took weeks to prove it. And I asked you to credit me some trust at the beginning that said, okay, this is my concept on where we're going with this. And I just asked you to trust me long enough until I can start putting the pieces together. I'm going to ask you the same thing here. Did I do that on the gates? After you trusted me initially, did I put enough pieces on there for you to say, yeah, he was right. I get the concept. I can see the scriptural support for it. He didn't just make that up. I'm asking you now to do the same thing with ecclesia. As we start talking about it, just accept that what I'm saying is true for right now, and then over the weeks, I hope to show you, I hope to be able to convince you from the scriptures that, yes, that is the correct understanding, the correct place that we are intending to go. So just grant me that trust in advance, and just like I did with the gates, I will make sure that that trust is not wasted or invalidated or damaged in any way. I will do my best to make sure that there's enough scripture and enough verses and enough concept and enough background or however you want to say it to support what I'm about to tell you. But you've got to at least start thinking of this new thing in order for the questions and the progression to make sense. Is everyone okay? Ecclesia is the word that church came from. Right. And what I'm about to say is this is what I think that word means. And it's going to take me weeks to develop it out and to prove it and to get you to understand the fullness of the concept and why I believe that.
Today, well, it's this place where you go.
Yes.
Once a week, twice a week, whatever. You have your 3 songs and a sermon.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
sermon has been, and that wasn't what Jesus defined the church as.
Correct. And that
We, that it was, palatable.
Welcome down to church service bus. That's,
Yes.
it's very consumer. I
Yes.
think that's the major.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that is, yeah. Instead of his army, it's what can he do for me? Like, yeah, that's good. That's a very concise way to say it.
God takes courage. And if you even go out individually and face something that's very evil, and it's just you alone, that, to me, that's ecclesia, you're part of it.
It is, but even in that, we've got kind of some junk that has been added to it. So bear with me as we begin to make the distinction between what Jesus defined as the church and what he meant and then the word that he used versus where we are today with it. Sure.
It's, you instantly see, it often said that there is a remnant.
Right.
God always has a remnant.
Right.
Is that an ecclesia in terms where we're going, are those?
The remnant is going to understand the concept of the ecclesia. The ones that aren't accepting the status quo, the ones that are continuing to push for more, continuing to push for this isn't good enough. This isn't what Jesus died to purchase. We're not there yet. It may be fine. It may not get us in trouble, but we're not living life to the full. We're not experiencing the totality of everything that we're designed to. There's got to be something that we need to do differently in order to see this differently, to see this happen differently. The remnant comes from the Old Testament. Gideon's army is one of the people that's described as a remnant sometimes. He started with 32,000 and God said, oh, you got too many, even though they were going up against, 180 something thousand. Yeah, they were hugely outnumbered even at the beginning. And God says, oh, you still got too many. So they went from 32 down to 10. And then he had another test and they went from 10,000 down to 300, I think. And God said, okay, now we got some numbers that we can work with because now it's about me and not about how good you are. Right, right. The remnant is sometimes described as those 300 that were left. Did that make the other, 31,700? Did that make them bad people? No. Did that make them less Jews or less God-fearing? They weren't the ones that were going to participate in this particular assignment. The remnant will be the ones that participate in this particular assignment. And one of the assignments that they're going to have to participate in is understanding this ecclesia and what that means and what Jesus empowered us to do when he gave us that title, when he defined that for us, when he used that.
Define what remnant is in one church. How is that defined within a church?
I don't know that it is.
I think
And I will also say that probably not every church is going to accept this ecclesia thing.
Often heard you say church, not a facility, not a.
Right.
Organization. Means organization.
It does in our concept. It doesn't in the original. I'm using that for lack of a better term as this thing Jesus created. I got to call it something.
And I think so much of it's silly and it's not structured properly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not going for structure here when I start talking about ecclesia. Interestingly enough, the Bible speaks very little about church structure. I wish that it gave you a chapter on, right. And that's a key concept in this whole thing. And I'm not saying we got to get away from these big assemblies. I'm not saying that. But for the church to really be doing what the church is doing, the size is sometimes a problem.
So when size gets large. That is where organizations fall.
Yes, yes,
Human concepts apply because we just don't know how to organize it and control it. For God, the best way, and so it often gets thrown off the rails or becomes this mega church. Not that there's always place for that.
Right.
You get what I'm saying?
And you added to organize it, to control it. And I'm not saying those are necessarily bad things, but those are all religious ideas that are part of this addition to ecclesia that the church has now become. Anyway,
Oh, you baptize this many were saved, and this, and then what do you do to make them belong?
that's an ongoing question. Right. And it's harder in larger churches. I think part of that will be solved once there's more people that grasp this ecclesia thing, and you get into your little group, your little circle, for lack of a better term, and then you join up with people that are attacking the same section of the gates that you are attacking. You'll find you'll find your tribe, you'll find your partners, you'll find your people that are supposed to go ascend this hill with you, or back you up, or help you get there. So the Greek word for ecclesia. Somebody else gonna say something? Okay. The Greek word for church is ecclesia. 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 It's Strong's 1577 if you want to start looking it up. I'm using a book as a reference by, forgot his name, Ed Silvoso, just called Ecclesia. I've got 2 or 3 other books that I have read about this, but his was the most helpful for the parts of it that I'm trying to talk about. There was another one that was more the how-to on how this guy created his own ecclesia and how he functions in his area. Anyway, that one was kind of helpful, but it wasn't as, and then I can't find the third one that I've got that I haven't read yet. I loaned it to somebody and they gave it back to me, and I put it somewhere. I'll have to find it. Anyway, ecclesia, Greek 1577. There's 2 different veins of biblical usage for this word. Let's start with the Christian sense of the word first. An assembly of Christians gathered for worship in a religious meeting. The company of Christians, or those who, hoping for eternal salvation through Jesus Christ, observe their own religious rites, hold their own religious meetings, and manage their own affairs according to regulations prescribed for the body for the order's sake. Those who anywhere in a city, village constitute such a company and are united in one body. The whole body of Christians scattered throughout the earth. The assembly of faithful Christians already dead and received into heaven. Now, all that sounds like what you would normally define church to be. That is where we would normally, if we went around the table and I said, what does church mean? Those are the stuff that we would normally get out of it. In addition to, and we've already hinted at this, the building. So much of church is connected to a building, and it shouldn't be connected to a building. But we'll talk about that later. So if that was the Christian vein, what would you think the other vein would be? The secular vein, the secular understanding of the word ecclesia. In the secular context, a gathering of citizens called out from their homes into some public place, an assembly. The assembly of Israelites, any gathering or throng of men assembled by chance, tumultuously. An assembly that went to a certain place. Now, what do you immediately think of after we've talked about the gates? Right. Where do you think that assembly is going to gather? At the gates. So Jesus is using a secular term here. We're going to hear that more and more frequently, and that's some of the things that I'm going to keep plugging away at as we get into this. Let's finish the definition here, and then we'll stop for today, and we'll pick this up again next week. Ecclesia is a compound word of ek or ex, Strong's 1537, meaning from or out of. It denotes origin. So part of the word for ecclesia denotes origin. It's also a derivative of kaleo, Strong's 2564, which means called, bid, invited, or named. Literally, ecclesia means called out. Called out. Putting all this together, you get the universal total body of believers whom God calls out from the world and into his eternal kingdom. So you get the universal, the body, the whole sum total of all believers called out of the world into God's kingdom. Now that's an important distinction. Not into a religious affiliation, not into a building, not into a church membership, but into his kingdom. What would happen with kingdoms? What's supposed to happen with a kingdom? What's the mark of a kingdom? A king which has authority. What does that authority produce? Domain. They're in control of their kingdom. Do you really have a king who has a kingdom that is not in charge of his kingdom? Do you have a kingdom if the way that the king wants it to go is not happening? So in our world, kingdom of God, kingdom of darkness, who's in charge? The God of this world. How can we tell? How do we know? Well, what's happening? Fruit. What's not happening?
Byproduct.
So if you want to know who is in charge of an area, look at what's happening in that area. Is that area poverty stricken? Is that God or is this world? Is that area full of drugs? Is that area full of depression? Is that area full of sickness? Is that area full of fill in the blank? So yeah. Versus God's idea for who is supposed to be running and how the thing's supposed to go once he gets to be in charge. So ecclesia is the sum total of all the people called out of this system into this system. What should they be doing to prove that they're in this new system? They need to listen for the calling and then do it so that they rule, so they extend the rule of the new kingdom and of the new king by consequence.
Revolutionary.
Yes.
And that's kind of what.
Yes. It's going to be revolutionary to us because we haven't considered it that way. It was not revolutionary to them. And we'll get to that. Okay? Correct. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Jesus became he was the Messiah, so, and that there was not a Messiah prior to that. As I guess I'm saying from that point, and now we are there formed, but revolutionary.
But it wasn't to them. It is to us. When he used this term in this context, it was not new to them, and we're going to get into that. Just trust. We're going to get there. That's what we're going to talk about is what this term means to them. Not necessarily to us, but to them. Was this a new concept? Was this a revolutionary idea? Was this how are we going to prove that? Well, there are several different veins that we're going to start following but from the beginning, what I want you to say is this was not a strange thing to them. This was a very common idea to them. Jesus used a secular word that they were very familiar with and expounded upon what he wanted that thing to be in their mind. So he wasn't introducing something new, even though it seems like he was introducing something. He was borrowing a term that they all understood and is now applying it in a new way.
See connections. It says love one another. Connections are.
Yeah, that's part of it. And there's going to be people that are going to be very gifted at making those connections
And
for people. Anyway, we're going to start for the next few weeks talking about this ecclesia thing. And I'm going to build on this thing week after week, hopefully, and get you to the point where you can accept that what I'm saying wasn't new to them, that it was a secular term, and that we, by our definition and insertion of church and all the things that go with that, have totally messed this idea up. And we need to start arresting our thoughts and start really thinking and even speaking differently about it. Who was called the ecclesia, not the church? It's the ecclesia, not the church. Do you want to be part of the ecclesia or do you want to be part of the church? Now, I'm not saying they're mutually exclusive. I'm saying that to get us to think correctly about what this is that Jesus was talking about. And we're going to have to take some extreme measures so that the trash that we have all inherited and have built up over the years doesn't continue to angle us in a certain direction that's not the correct vein that we want to be in. Is everyone okay with that? Is everyone good with it? I'm excited to start talking about this, and it will fit in nicely to what we've already learned about the gates. When you learn what the ecclesia is supposed to do, well, it makes sense that he used that term because of what the gates are, how the gates are presented, and what they represent. So it makes sense that this whole package goes together when we understand it correctly. I'll post all this on, just like I always have. Won't show up on where? Yeah, yeah. I haven't given you any homework yet on this part of it. I might this week, but I don't know. We'll see. Any other questions? Any other thoughts?
Like, getting set apart, and this is like called out.
Yes,
Similar terms.
they're all similar terms. They all mean something different. And if we got it right from the beginning, they'd all be the same thing. From the world into this new kingdom. And then the part where we missed it is we're in the new kingdom, but what does that mean? Correct. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Okay. The old man's dead. I'm living in this new life. What does that new life look like? What it's supposed to look like?
Basically the same theme again and again, and we say it with different words.
And we have religiousized each of those different things to mean something different. Jesus didn't make all those separations, but we're going to have to start making those distinctions in order for us to get back to what he actually intended, what he meant. Now, I'm not saying called out or set apart or saved or born. I'm not saying any of those terms are wrong or whatever. I'm just saying they have a connotation with them that, at least for the time being, we need to begin to arrest until we get clear about what Jesus actually spoke, what he actually meant, and then we can kind of go backwards and put it back with our vernacular and see where it fits and how it goes.